Hello, I am Naomi Taylor. I work for Worcester City Council as the Historic Environment Record and Project Support Assistant. I've always lived in Worcester and I'm quite passionate about the heritage of my home city and particularly its role in the Second World War. This interest led to this project, an investigation into the current condition and protection of World War II archaeology in Worcestershire. It's partially my third year dissertation, as well as a look at next steps and further research I hope to do on the topic. In 1940, the British were preparing for potential invasion by German forces. This involved the creation of various defence structures such as gun emplacements, anti-tank cylinders and pillboxes, some of which still remain today. These structures were positioned in many different locations with the intent of preventing the enemy's advance or slowing them down to give time to gather resources and fight back. Worcestershire in particular was a key region in this plan. It was close to industrial areas such as Birmingham and the Black Country, and had several war factories and storage for war materials. It was also chosen as a place for the royal family and the government to move to should London be invaded or heavily bombed. There were also several stop lines through the county along the rivers Severn, Avon, and Team, and there were anti-tank islands around Worcester, Kidderminster, and Redditch. Worcestershire's role in World War II has been covered extensively by Mick Wilkes in his book and project Defence of Worcestershire, which was an offshoot of the Defence of Britain project. So these defensive structures then, they have important local significance. Mick Wilkes identified only 16 pillboxes left when he carried out his project in 2007, and this has been further reduced. When I did my project, I tried to find the original 16, but could only find around 7. So this local heritage is in danger of being lost. For this project, I focused solely on pillboxes because I had limited time, but I intend to expand this to the more broader term of World War II archaeology in the future. But for now, this is just looking at my study on pillboxes. They were one of the most common structures built during the Second World War, and they were to act as fighting bases which would defend the stop lines and associated vulnerable points such as airfields. It was estimated by the Defence of Britain project that approximately 28,000 pillboxes were built, and that just under 25% of them survive today. But it's most likely that this has been even further reduced since the project was actually carried out over 15 years ago now. Mike Osborne put together a typology of pillboxes in his book in 2008, classifying them by shape. He identified 11 overall types, each one with its own several subvariants. This is further amplified by the fact that due to the construction taking place in wartime, many of the pillboxes didn't actually stick to the original plans that were produced by the War Office. They were often modified according to what materials were available, as well as they were influenced by those who built them or the environment that they were for. There are several unique examples in Worcestershire, which just shows the local significance that they have and which really demonstrates the urgency of their protection in the area. And they're not just important to one generation either. Later generations have interacted with these structures, and it was actually in speaking to one of my lecturers just before I started my project that he actually mentioned playing around and inside them as a young boy. So it's not just their wartime context, which is significant to local people. Now, if we look at some examples in the Worcestershire area, rather handily, my obsession with pillboxes has been present since I was at college. And I did a final project while I was there, and I looked at World War II archaeology. So I actually have some nice examples spread over a few years. Here on the left, we have Throckmorton pillbox, which is a type 22. It's a mix of brick and concrete. As you can see, the concrete is part of the roof and the brick for the outside and the general overall bulk of the structure. The top photo was taken during my college project, which was in 2014. Back then, as you can see, it had quite a significant amount of vegetation covering it. But the below photo is from when I visited in 2020, and it had actually been cleaned up, which was quite nice to see. However, Eckington pillbox, which is the one on the right here, this is a prefabricated stent pillbox, so it's a roughly square shape and made of concrete. It's quite close to the river, as you can see in the middle picture, and it has a large tree right next to it. So it wasn't too bad when I visited in 2014, which is the top right photo. It has obviously the tree quite in the way, but largely the structure was intact. But when I visited in 2020, I haven't put the photo on yet because I wasn't able to get close. There was no longer any public access and it looked very overgrown from a distance. I did manage to find this photo at the bottom, however, which does also date to 2014, which shows quite severe damage, which the person who took the photo said that this was most likely from the floods and also most likely not helped by the tree. It's also noted on both the HER record and for the Defence of Britain project record, which would have been back in the 90s or early 2000s, that it's in real danger of slipping down into the river. On this slide, we have Stamford Bridge pillbox, which is on the left. It's made of brick and it's entirely covered all the way around and on top, so it's not actually identified as any particular type. I'm not sure if that's because it's not visible. I actually just happened to notice the doorway and the opening in the wall, which made me realise that that was where the pillbox was. But aside from that, there's no way of knowing what this is if you don't have that awareness of these structures. In the middle is Droitwich pillbox. That's a type 26 made of brick and concrete. Again, the concrete roof, brick for the rest of the structure, and it's again almost entirely covered in vegetation and foliage. This one, though, is at least fenced off within a children's play area. So it's got a large, quite high metal fencing. On the right is probably the best example in the area that we have, which is Whittington Road pillbox. It's a brick and concrete type 24, which has been kept relatively well. It's fenced off and it has an interpretation panel put there to explain what it is. It was, though, originally part of a pair, but the other was demolished for development. So as you can see, several of these examples are not in very good shape. Many are not very visible or they're almost destroyed. And for some, there's no protection from further damage, such as vandalism or being demolished. So what can be done? In my initial project, I suggested a number of things. Protection is the obvious one, whether that's national or local. And obviously, the hope is that with increased protection, it means that they are less likely to be lost, although that's not necessarily always the case. Definitely increased public awareness is key. I would say interpretation panels, the obvious thing to place alongside them, as we've already seen, as well as just having that general maintenance to make sure they're visible. For example, the Throckmorton one that's now fully visible from the roadside is really great. But technology is also advancing and we now have things such as QR codes that can point to further sources of information. They're a bit easier to produce and potentially cheaper than an interpretation panel. If we can't prevent the structures from being lost, then of course the basic minimum has to be detailed archaeological survey. It has to be photographs, drawings, plans, observations, survey forms completed to record the current condition, like I completed during my dissertation. And of course, that's an ideal way to engage volunteers. Potentially from this, there could also be management plans put in place if they're not in immediate danger of being lost. So again, encouraging general maintenance or regular recording to keep the HER records up to date. In extreme cases, such as Eckington, they could be rescued. The prefab types are particularly ideal for this, as somebody called Ward notes that they are easier to move and rebuild because of the concrete slabs that make them up. Since completing my dissertation, though, I've also become aware of some other potential solutions. Through my role in Worcester City Council, I've been involved in the Worcester Life Stories project, which was a community project encouraging members of the public to share their memories of mainly 1950s Worcester and what it was like growing up then. So this produced this interactive map platform called Know Your Place Worcester. It's based off and hosted by Know Your Place Bristol and has an interactive map which is available to the public. It links to the HER featuring monuments, as you can see here. It's got points and polygons, and I've brought up one of the tabs which would show the Whittington Road pillbox. Members of the public can then upload photographs, videos, documents, voice recordings, any kind of memory that they have, and it can be attached specifically to a place. They don't have to log in, they don't have to create an account, they submit it, and it gets approved by someone else who's actually my manager, but she approves somebody's submission, so it's also controlled. It also has, as you can see, comparative mapping, and this one I've chosen is the 1940s County Series 4th Epoch. So this is a really great way of putting the pillboxes in context in the 1940s map. It's great for gaining public awareness and engaging volunteers. It already has ties to an established local project that has awareness in the community. I've also heard through CBA West Midlands, I heard about the work in Staffordshire and the Transforming the Trent Valley project, in which pillboxes are being repurposed for use by wildlife. One difficulty with pillboxes is they're often seen as structures that cannot be reused, and previous attempts in my local area have failed, as was seen in Stourport when one was converted into a tourist information centre before it was eventually demolished. This use, however, which they've used in the Trent Valley, would link into biodiversity and encourage protection of the environment, which is obviously quite a big thing at the moment. It's a big focus and concern for people. And it would have the added bonus of preserving our local heritage and archaeology. As you can see on the screen, this is Staffordshire's guide that they've produced on actually how to do this step by step. And it's also great for widening the audience reach and for increasing awareness, because you're also talking to people whose main concern is biodiversity. And they've also been producing various reconstructions, such as 3D reconstruction, and also pictures of how the pillbox may have looked back in the 1940s, which is quite a nice touch. So here are my references, but just to close, pillboxes can often be an overlooked and disregarded piece of archaeology. They're very recent, and they're linked to a piece of history that often some people can feel is a bit overdone, or it's very broadly covered. But there's a lot that we don't know about them still. They can look like very boring, dull structures. They're bits of brick and concrete. They can seem difficult to reuse, and because of this, many are eager to see them demolished. But they are an important piece of national and local heritage, which, particularly in my local area, is being reduced and in real danger of being lost. There's a sense of urgency as we move closer to losing the generation who initially engaged with these structures during those wartime years. Thank you.